The gunshot echoed across the Montana territory like God's own thunder, sending a flock of startled ravens into the crimson evening sky as Sienna Grayson stumbled down from the stagecoach, her face streaked with tears and a small bundle clutched tightly to her chest. It had been 3 years since she'd seen Whitetail Creek, 3 long years since she'd fled in the dead of night, leaving nothing but a hastily scrawled note for the man she'd loved beyond reason. Zachary Finch had been breaking a particularly ornery stallion when he heard the commotion at the edge of town. His hands stilled on the reins, the horse beneath him suddenly forgotten as he caught sight of a familiar silhouette against the setting sun. For a moment, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him. It wouldn't be the first time he'd imagined her return, but as the woman turned, there was no mistaking those amber eyes that had haunted his dreams since the spring of 1872. The year was now 1875, and Sienna had changed. Gone was the carefree young woman who danced barefoot by moonlight. In her place stood someone weathered by life's harsh lessons. And in her arms, wrapped in a faded blue blanket, was a little girl with a shock of dark hair and eyes that Zachary recognized immediately. His boots hit the ground hard as he dismounted, ignoring the curious stares of the townsfolk as he crossed the distance between them. His heart pounded against his ribs like a wild thing seeking escape. Sienna's eyes widened at the sight of him, her lower lip trembling as she clutched the child tighter. "Zachary," she whispered, her voice breaking on his name. He stopped before her, his gaze moving from her face to the small bundle in her arms. Without a word, Sienna extended the child toward him, and he took her with hands that had broken horses but never held anything so precious. The little girl blinked up at him, a tiny hand reaching up to touch his weathered face. And in that moment, Zachary Finch knew with absolute certainty that this was his daughter. "I've loved you twice over," he said, his voice rough with emotion as he cradled the child in one arm and reached for Sienna with the other. The townspeople of Whitetail Creek had plenty to gossip about that evening. Sienna's sudden return was scandalous enough, but the sight of Zachary Finch, the most eligible bachelor in 3 counties, embracing her and a child on Main Street was enough to keep tongues wagging for weeks. Sienna followed Zachary to his cabin on the outskirts of town, a modest but sturdy structure he'd built with his own hands on land he'd purchased with the earnings from his horse-breaking business. The interior was simple but comfortable, with handcrafted furniture and a stone fireplace that dominated one wall. "Her name is Emma," Sienna said softly as Zachary built a fire to ward off the evening chill. "Emma Rose Finch, I gave her your name even though." She trailed off, unable to finish. Zachary straightened, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the growing flames. "Even though you left without telling me you were carrying my child." There was no accusation in his tone, merely a statement of fact, but Sienna flinched nonetheless. She settled Emma on a small pallet she'd fashioned from her traveling cloak, the child exhausted from the journey and already drifting into peaceful slumber. "I was scared, Zachary. I was 20 years old and pregnant. My father would have." She shook her head, remembering the rigid disapproval of Judge Grayson. "He would have forced us to marry. And that would have been such a terrible fate," Zachary asked, his voice quiet but intense. Sienna looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I wanted you to marry me because you loved me, not because you had to, and I didn't want to trap you. You had dreams, Zachary, dreams of your own ranch, your own legacy. I couldn't bear to be the reason those dreams died." Zachary moved to her side, his calloused hand gently tilting her chin upward. "My dreams were always about you, Sienna. The ranch, the horses, they were just details. You were the heart of it all." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I didn't know. I was young and foolish, and I thought I was doing the right thing. I went to my aunt in California, told her everything. She took me in, helped me through the birth, and afterward." She glanced at their sleeping daughter. "Afterward, I realized what a terrible mistake I'd made, keeping Emma from her father." "Why now?" Zachary asked. After 3 years, Sienna's expression darkened. "My aunt passed away 2 months ago, and my father found out about Emma. He sent word that if I returned to Whitetail Creek, he would see to it that Emma was taken from me and placed with a proper family. Her voice trembled with anger and fear. I couldn't let that happen. I had nowhere else to turn, Zachary. I came home to you. The word home hung between them, filled with meaning and possibility. Zachary's hand moved to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away another tear. You've always had a home with me, Sienna, always. The following morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the cabin windows as Zachary prepared a simple breakfast. Emma, awake and curious, explored the cabin on unsteady legs, occasionally returning to clutch at her mother's skirts for reassurance. She's beautiful, Zachary said, watching his daughter with wonder. She has your smile, Sienna laughed softly, and your stubborn determination. You should see her when she wants something. Nothing will stand in her way. Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Zachary's hand instinctively moved to the revolver at his hip before he crossed to the entrance, opening it cautiously. Judge Henry Grayson stood on the porch, his tall frame rigid with barely contained fury, flanked by the town sheriff. The judge's cold gaze swept past Zachary to land on Sienna and the child. So it's true, he said, his voice cutting through the morning quiet. You've returned with your bastard child. Zachary stepped forward, blocking the judge's view. You'll watch your tongue in my house, Judge. That's my daughter you're speaking of. The judge's eyebrows rose. Indeed, then I suppose congratulations are in order for the new father. His tone made it clear the words were anything but sincere. Sheriff, I believe we have grounds for an arrest. Corruption of a minor. I was 20 years old, father, Sienna interrupted, moving to stand beside Zachary, Emma balanced on her hip. Hardly a minor, and I made my own choices. Foolish choices that have brought shame to our family name, the judge snapped. I've arranged for the child to be taken to a good Christian home in Helena. The papers are already drawn up. Zachary's hand tightened on the doorframe, his knuckles white. Emma stays with her parents. Parents? The judge laughed coldly. An unwed mother and a horse breaker. The court would never consider such an arrangement suitable. Then I'll make it suitable, Zachary replied, his voice steady. He turned to Sienna, his eyes never leaving hers as he spoke. Marry me, Sienna, today. Now, we'll ride to the preacher's house this morning. Sienna's eyes widened. Zachary, you don't have to. I'm not doing this because I have to, he interrupted gently. I'm doing it because I want to. Because I've wanted to since the first moment I saw you at the harvest dance 5 years ago. Because I love you and I love our daughter and I want us to be a family. The judge made a sound of disgust. This changes nothing. A hasty marriage won't. It changes everything, Sheriff Morgan interjected, speaking for the first time. Judge, you know as well as I do that if they're married, there's no legal grounds to separate them from their child. He looked uncomfortable, clearly caught between his duty to the law and his conscience. And if I may speak plainly, sir, I've known Zachary Finch for 10 years. There isn't a more honorable man in the territory. The judge's face flushed with anger, but he was a man who had built his career on the letter of the law. He knew when he was beaten. You disappoint me, Sienna, he said coldly. When this arrangement inevitably fails, don't come looking for help. With that, he turned and stalked away, leaving the sheriff standing awkwardly on the porch. I'm sorry about this, Zach, the sheriff said quietly. The judge has been difficult since his wife passed. Zachary nodded, understanding more than most the impact of loss. His own parents had died in a cholera outbreak when he was 16, leaving him to make his way in the world alone. No hard feelings, Tom, he replied. You were just doing your job. The sheriff tipped his hat to Sienna. Madam, for what it's worth, I think you've made a fine choice. He smiled at Emma, who was watching him with solemn eyes. And that's a beautiful little girl you have there. After the sheriff departed, Sienna turned to Zachary, her expression troubled. Did you mean it, about wanting to marry me? Because if you're only doing this to keep Emma, Zachary silenced her with a gentle kiss, his hands framing her face. I have loved you for 5 years, Sienna Grayson. I loved you when you danced under the stars at the Harvest Festival. I loved you when you read poetry to me by the creek. I loved you when you left, and I loved you every day you were gone. And now I love you twice over in you and in our daughter. Tears welled in Sienna's eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. "I've never stopped loving you, Zachary, not for a single moment." 2 hours later, they stood before Reverend White in the small white church at the edge of town. Sienna wore a simple blue dress, the nicest she'd brought with her, and Zachary had donned a clean shirt and his best jacket. Emma, dressed in a freshly pressed gown, played contentedly with a wooden horse Zachary had carved for her that morning, already attached to the father she'd just met. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, witnessed only by the sheriff and his wife, who had graciously agreed to stand up for them. As Zachary slipped a simple gold band onto Sienna's finger, his mother's ring, which he'd kept safe all these years, he felt a sense of rightness settle over him. This was always meant to be. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the Reverend declared, a warm smile on his weathered face. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Zachary kissed his bride, their daughter balanced between them, and knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The first weeks of their marriage were a time of adjustment and discovery. Zachary learned the rhythms of fatherhood, the sleepless nights when Emma's teething pains kept her fussing, the joy of her delighted laughter when he tossed her into the air, the fierce protectiveness that surged through him whenever he thought of the future she would face. Sienna, meanwhile, transformed his bachelor cabin into a home. She hung curtains at the windows, planted flowers along the path, and filled the rooms with music and laughter. In the evenings, after Emma was asleep, they would sit on the porch, watching the stars emerge and sharing the stories of the years they'd been apart. Zachary told her of his growing business, how he'd gained a reputation for being able to gentle even the wildest horses, how he'd saved every penny to buy more land, determined to build something that would have made her proud. Sienna spoke of her time in California, of the kindness of her aunt, of the moment she first held Emma in her arms and saw Zachary's eyes looking back at her. She told him of her work as a seamstress, of the quiet life they'd led, and of how, every night, she'd told Emma stories about her brave, strong father. "I never wanted her to grow up not knowing who you were," Sienna admitted one evening as they sat before the fire. "I was wrong to keep you apart even for those first years. I see that now." Zachary took her hand, his thumb tracing the gold band on her finger. "We can't change the past, Sienna, but we have now and we have the future. That's what matters." Yet shadows from the past were not so easily banished. Judge Grayson remained a formidable presence in Whitetail Creek, and his disapproval cast a pall over the young family's happiness. He made no attempt to see his granddaughter, and when Sienna encountered him in town, he would turn away, refusing to acknowledge her. "It shouldn't matter," she told Zachary after one such encounter, trying to hide the hurt in her voice. "I have you and Emma, that's all I need." But Zachary knew better. Family was family, for good or ill, and the rift between Sienna and her father was a wound that would not heal on its own. The situation came to a head in late autumn, when Emma fell ill with a high fever that nothing seemed to break. Sienna hadn't slept in 2 days, desperately trying every remedy she knew while Zachary rode through the night to fetch the doctor from the next town. When he returned with Dr. Marshall, the physician, examined Emma with a grave expression. "Pneumonia," he diagnosed, his voice somber. "It's advanced, I'm afraid." Sienna's face went pale. Will she recover?" The doctor hesitated. "Children are resilient, Mrs. Finch, but this is serious. There's a treatment, a relatively new one that might help, but I don't have the necessary medicine with me." "Where can we get it?" Zachary demanded. "Judge Grayson has it," the doctor replied. "He ordered it from back east after his own bout with pneumonia last winter. It's the only supply in the county." Zachary didn't hesitate. Within minutes, he was on his horse, racing toward the judge's imposing house on the hill overlooking Whitetail Creek. He pounded on the door, caring nothing for propriety or the late hour. The judge himself answered, dressed in a silk dressing gown, his face hardening when he recognized his visitor. "Mr. Finch, to what do I owe this intrusion?" "Emma is sick," Zachary said without preamble. "Pneumonia. The doctor says you have medicine that could save her life." Something flickered in the judge's eyes, concern, perhaps, or simply surprise. "I see," She's your granddaughter, Zachary pressed when the judge made no move to help. Your flesh and blood, would you let her suffer to punish Sienna and me? The judge's jaw tightened. I am not in the habit of being lectured on family duty by a man like you, Mr. Finch. A man like me. Zachary stepped closer, his voice low and intense. You mean a man who loves your daughter, a man who would die for her and for our child. A man who has worked every day of his life to be worthy of them. He took a deep breath, fighting for control. Judge Grayson, I am not asking for myself. I am asking for an innocent child who has done nothing to deserve your hatred. For a long moment, the judge was silent, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he turned and disappeared into the house. Zachary waited, his heart pounding, ready to force his way in if necessary, but the judge returned moments later with a small glass bottle. This is what the doctor prescribed for me, he said stiffly. Tell him to use it sparingly, it's potent. Zachary took the bottle, relief flooding through him. Thank you. As he turned to leave, the judge's voice stopped him. Finch, how bad is she? Zachary looked back, seeing for the first time the vulnerability beneath the judge's stern exterior. Bad enough that I'm standing on your porch at midnight, begging for help. The judge nodded slowly. I will call tomorrow to inquire after her progress. It was the closest thing to a peace offering Zachary could have hoped for. The medicine worked, though Emma's recovery was slow. For days, Sienna and Zachary took turns sitting by her bedside, cooling her fever with damp cloths and administering the precious medicine at carefully timed intervals. True to his word, Judge Grayson sent his housekeeper the following day to inquire after Emma's health. The day after that, he sent fresh bread and a pot of chicken soup. And on the third day, as Emma's fever finally broke, he appeared at their door himself, stiff and formal, but present. I would like to see my granddaughter, he said, the words clearly difficult for him. If that would be permissible. Sienna, exhausted but radiant with relief at Emma's improvement, hesitated only briefly before nodding. She's awake. She'd like to meet her grandfather. The judge entered Emma's room with the caution of a man approaching a wild animal. The little girl, pale but alert, watched him with curious eyes. Zachary's eyes, the judge noted with a start. Hello, Emma, he said, his voice gentler than Sienna could ever remember hearing it. I'm your grandfather. Emma studied him solemnly before offering a small smile. Mama says you have a big house with lots of books. The judge's expression softened fractionally. Indeed I do. Perhaps when you're feeling better, you might visit and see them for yourself. It was a beginning fragile and uncertain, but a beginning nonetheless. As winter settled over Montana territory, the Finch family found their rhythm. Zachary's business continued to thrive, his reputation spreading to neighboring counties. Sienna began taking in sewing work, her skilled hands creating everything from wedding dresses to practical work clothes. And Emma, fully recovered from her illness, blossomed under the love of her parents and the grudging but growing affection of her grandfather. Judge Grayson never explicitly apologized for his earlier behavior, but his actions spoke volumes. He invited the family for Sunday dinners, presented Emma with carefully chosen gifts, and even on occasion engaged Zachary in conversations about horse breeding and ranching that were almost cordial. He's trying, Sienna told Zachary one night as they prepared for bed. In his own way, he's trying to make amends. Zachary nodded, pulling her close. That's all we can ask. People change slowly like rivers carving canyons. It takes time. The spring of 1876 brought new beginnings. Zachary's careful investments and hard work paid off when he was able to purchase an additional 80 acres adjoining his property prime grazing land with a year-round creek. He and Sienna spent hours planning the ranch they would build there, a legacy for Emma and, God willing, the siblings they hoped would follow. That hope became reality in April when Sienna discovered she was expecting their second child. This time, she shared the news with Zachary immediately, her eyes alight with joy as she placed his hand on her still flat stomach. Another miracle, he whispered, drawing her into his arms. Another chance to love you all over again. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into autumn. Emma, now nearly 4, was fascinated by the changes in her mother's body, talking earnestly to her unborn sibling and making grand plans for all the things she would teach the baby. Zachary worked tirelessly, determined to have the new house completed before winter set in. It was larger than their cabin, with 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a covered porch that wrapped around 3 sides. He built it with his own hands, with occasional help from neighbors, and even, to everyone's surprise, Judge Grayson, who appeared one Saturday with his sleeves rolled up, ready to work. "I've never built anything before," the judge admitted when Zachary raised an eyebrow at his unexpected arrival. "But I'm willing to learn for my grandchildren." They moved into the new house in November, just as the first snowflakes began to fall. Sienna, heavy with child, walked from room to room, marveling at what Zachary had created for them. "It's perfect," she told him, tears of happiness in her eyes. Absolutely perfect. Their son was born on Christmas Eve, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. Zachary, who had insisted on being present despite the doctor's protests, wept openly as he held his newborn son, counting tiny fingers and toes in wonder. "What shall we name him?" Sienna asked, exhausted but radiant as she watched her husband and son. Zachary thought for a moment. "How about Samuel, after your grandfather?" Sienna smiled, touched that he remembered the stories she'd told him of her beloved grandfather, a kind and gentle man who had always encouraged her dreams. "Samuel Zachary Finch, it's perfect." Emma, allowed into the room to meet her brother, approached the bed with wide-eyed solemnity. Zachary lifted her up to see the baby, and her face broke into a delighted smile. "He's so small," she exclaimed. "Can I hold him, Mama, please?" With careful instruction, Emma was settled in a chair, her arms positioned to support her brother's head. The look of absolute concentration on her face as she held Samuel for the first time brought tears to both parents' eyes. "I'm going to take care of you forever," she promised the baby in a serious whisper. "Just like Papa takes care of us." Later that night, with both children asleep, Samuel in a cradle beside their bed and Emma in her own room across the hall, Zachary and Sienna stood at the window, watching the snow fall in the silver moonlight. "Did you ever imagine this?" Sienna asked, leaning back against his chest as his arms encircled her. "When I left, did you ever think we would find our way back to each other?" Zachary pressed a kiss to her temple. "I hoped. Every day I hoped. And when I saw you step down from that stagecoach with Emma in your arms, I knew that hope hadn't been in vain." Sienna turned in his embrace to face him. "I was so afraid that day, afraid you would hate me for keeping Emma from you, afraid you had moved on, afraid of what the future held." "And now?" he asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Now I'm not afraid of anything," she replied with a smile, "not as long as we're together." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the Montana landscape in pristine white. Inside, in the warmth of the home they had built together, Zachary and Sienna Finch held each other close, grateful for second chances and the enduring power of love that had brought them full circle. In the years that followed, their family continued to grow. A daughter, Elizabeth, joined them in 1878, followed by twins, James and Joseph, in 1880. The Rocking F Ranch, as they named their spread, became known throughout the territory for its fine horses and warm hospitality. Judge Grayson, mellowed by time and the love of his grandchildren, became a regular presence in their lives. He never directly addressed the wrongs of the past, but on Emma's wedding day in 1891, as he prepared to walk his granddaughter down the aisle, he paused to speak privately with Sienna and Zachary. "You've raised a remarkable young woman," he told them, his voice gruff with emotion. "All of your children are a credit to you both. I was wrong all those years ago. I see that now." It was as close to an apology as the proud old man would ever come, and it was enough. That evening, as the celebration wound down and the younger children were put to bed, Zachary found Sienna standing alone on the porch, gazing up at the stars, the same stars they had danced under when they first fell in love. "A penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Finch," he said, coming to stand beside her. Sienna smiled, leaning into him. I was just thinking about that day I came back to Whitetail Creek, how terrified I was, how uncertain of the future. And look at us now, Zachary said, gesturing to the prosperous ranch around them, the house filled with sleeping children and grandchildren. 5 children, 1 grandchild on the way, and more blessings than we can count. Sienna turned to face him, her hand reaching up to trace the lines that 20 years had etched on his beloved face. Do you remember what you said to me that day, when you first held Emma? Zachary smiled, drawing her closer. I said I loved you twice over, and I meant it. And now? She asked, her eyes shining in the moonlight. Now, he replied, his voice rich with emotion, I love you 1,000 times over, in every child, in every moment, in every breath we take together, and I will love you thus until the stars themselves burn out. As they stood together under the vast Montana sky, Sienna and Zachary Finch knew they had found something rare and precious, a love that had weathered separation and doubt, hardship and joy, to emerge stronger and deeper than either could have imagined on that fateful day when she returned in tears with a daughter, and he held the child and recognized his own heart looking back at him. It was a love for the ages, born in the wild freedom of the West, tempered by life's challenges, and destined to endure long after their own story came to its natural close. A love, quite simply, worth coming home for.